I was fortunate enough to grow up in an era of video games that was simply unmatched. Banger after banger released by publishers and developers that cared about their product, where the only revenue source was the game sale itself, so it was imperative that they nailed it right out of the gates. There was no chance for further monies, no DLC, no in-game microtransactions, no in-game currency, and no loot boxes. If you failed at launch, you failed. What this meant was the game testers were worth their weight in gold. Developers innovated and pushed the creative direction in an attempt to stand out from the crowd. So even in genres where there was a wide plethora of choices, games would often stand out purely because they were bold enough to try new things, implement new gameplay mechanics, and generally try and encourage people to buy their game rather than a competitor's. When I set the wheels in motion for this channel, I had several games in mind already that I wanted to showcase and relive. Need for Speed Underground 2 and the following year's Need for Speed Most Wanted are two of my favourite racing games of all time. The franchise was well established by the time that these two released, with 7 games having already released before these, including the original Need for Speed Underground coming the year before in 2003. Despite my distrust of franchises that release yearly, Need for Speed had been doing this pretty much ever since the inception of the series, with only a couple of exceptions along the way. Need for Speed 2 came out in 1997. Despite the regular releases, they managed to be different enough with each entry, certainly after I got into the franchise around Hot Pursuit in 2002, that the series didn't make me feel the dreaded burnout. This would become a problem for me, however, later in the franchise's lifespan. But this period was the golden era. Hot Pursuit 2, Underground, Underground 2, and Most Wanted released one after the other, and they were, well, for me at least, absolute killer entries in this franchise. After these games, they kind of went on releasing almost every year with a few exceptions, and the end results differed quite significantly from each other. For me, the series never really hit the heights again, and whilst there were some fairly big deviations from the formula at times, with some games going for a more realistic handling model such as Need for Speed Shift, for me, it was never the same after the 2005 Most Wanted entry. No word of a lie, booting up Need for Speed Underground 2 and hearing Riders on the Storm kick in on the main menu still raises a smile, 20 years after my first experience with it. Immediately replaying the intro where you're driving around in a modded Nissan 350Z, I remember hitting those perfect gear changes in the drag racing mode, hearing the engine tones of the awesome looking cars with their custom body kits, rims and neon lights as you're drifting around corners, and it all still hits the right spot for me. I was 14, cars were cool, modding them was kind of the in thing of the time period, and this game and the original released around the time that Too Fast, Too Furious came out. Whilst today, when I watch that movie, I'll be honest, it's pretty poor.
Hey, real funny, Fonzie.
The game itself is a sequel not only in numbers but in narrative as well. The story takes place after the initial events of Underground, shortly after the player beats Eddie and his street racing gang, the Eastsiders, in Olympic City along with Melissa. Despite being revered as the best street racer in the city, things all go south when our beautiful Skyline GTR is destroyed and we wind up having to buy an old banger with the insurance money. The cars you can buy in this game at that point perfectly fit the theme. We're talking Peugeot 106s, Ford Focuses and Toyota Corollas, after which you embark on a journey with Rachel and start racing once again, rebuilding your reputation and car performance from the ground up. The gameplay has this perfect blend where the cars are not too janky, they don't react too quickly to inputs, but they're also not too lazy so that the car ends up feeling heavy. It manages to find this middle ground where the cars were fun and not too difficult to control, but still maintain a degree of difficulty that ensured you had to stay focused. The game has the most customization of any game in the series, and it is why it's considered by many to be the best Need for Speed game of all time. There were tons of upgrades, mods and color combinations that you could apply to your vehicles, meaning you really could stamp your own unique blend of crazy and mad designs on the original car, or go for a better one as you go through the game. It would also be impossible to finish the praise for Underground 2 without giving it the credit it deserves for being the first Need for Speed game to integrate an open world, which very much set the foundation that future games in this series would build upon. It resonated with everybody, so much so that it is the third most successful Need for Speed entry in terms of sales, shifting 11 million units. Its predecessor, Need for Speed Underground, was slightly more successful sales-wise, selling a whopping 15 million units. This isn't to say, of course, that this game wasn't without its flaws. The aforementioned open world was an impressive feat and certainly innovative, for the series at the time, but it did get somewhat tedious after a while, driving between the locations when the world itself was pretty much devoid of any life. You would drive around and only see the odd car here or there. Yes, you saw some custom cars that were being driven around by AI, but by and large, it was pretty lifeless. Something that Need for Speed Most Wanted very much expanded upon and improved in the next entry. Then there was the soundtrack. Listening to the same songs playing over and over was frustrating, but I would say it did have some absolute bangers in there. It was a great soundtrack, it just wasn't big enough. I believe I also recall some issues with the AI, in particular the scaling of the difficulty level towards the latter stages of the game, where they would somehow become ludicrously good when you upgraded your car to a certain point. Some even reported to get around that, you had to downgrade your car so that the AI would drop the difficulty level. These were not issues that, in my opinion at least, come close to tarnishing what was an incredible game. Need for Speed Underground 2 was an absolute gem, and still to this day, I very much enjoy playing it. Now moving on into 2005's Need for Speed Most Wanted entry. Now it may not have been a follow-on directly narratively, but what it did do was evolve the series. I mentioned previously that one downside to Need for Speed Underground 2's open world was that, being the first of its kind, it kind of lacked a bit of substance. It wasn't fleshed out, and as a result it felt empty. Most Wanted clearly knew this, and they added that variety. They added interesting POIs, and more importantly, it added back in the pursuit mechanic with cops hunting you down. Something we hadn't seen in the series since Hot Pursuit 2. This meant whilst you were travelling around the world, things could happen while you were driving. Spontaneous events, there were even speed cameras to try and test how fast you could get snapped. It takes place in the fictional city of Rockport, which consists of 3 major districts: Rosewood, Camden Beach and downtown Rockport. The city consists of areas featuring grimy industrial complexes, affluent suburbs, mountainous and wooded surroundings, a university campus and a downtown core, with a mixture of road networks ranging from coastal roads to major highways. All of this once again makes this game's open world feel so much more rich and vibrant, with each area having its own unique setting and feel, and it stopped the game from ever really getting dull. Like Underground, the game features a selection of stock cars to choose from, each of which can be modified during the game's career mode with upgrades to enhance its performance and visual appearance. Customization of the car's appearance though is more limited, probably for licensing reasons, but also due to the main emphasis of the customization in this game is to reduce the car's heat level rather than for reputation as in the Underground series. So it does sort of fit the narrative that if licensing didn't have anything to do with it, it actually made sense from a gameplay perspective. Story-wise, Most Wanted excelled as well. In the city of Rockport, the Rockport Police Department, or RPD, are working to put an end to the city's illegal street racing scene. A task force of traffic officers led by Sergeant Jonathan Cross, played by Dean McKenzie, works to bring down any street races, most prominently including a group known as the Blacklist. 15 street racers who have gained notoriety for their racing skill and their frequent and hazardous law-breaking driving. The story was all told through the use of cutscenes as opposed to the voiceover and comic book strip style visuals that we saw in Need for Speed Underground 2. But in what has become sort of synonymous with Need for Speed over the years, it isn't just straight up cutscenes. They had to throw in a little bit of sauce as well. This had this wacky combination of in-game graphics with slightly blurry and heavily filtered live action acting from the cast. It is so very strange, but somehow it worked. And I really do miss the days where FMV cutscenes were a thing, don't you guys? Graphically, it was quite the step up from Underground 2, even with its slightly chromed out, sepia-toned landscapes. It was stunning for a game of its time. The car lineup was strong, with a great range of cars from slower hatchbacks to exotic supercars, and the acting, dialogue and style of the cutscenes meant that the story remained interesting and intriguing to the very end. These two games are amazing, and whilst I think that Most Wanted stands up better in 2024 than Underground 2 does, they are still very memorable entries in what sadly became an oversaturated and slightly rehashed franchise. But wait, there's more. Could there be a revival in the offing? Well, according to a now deleted Instagram and Twitter post from actress Simone Bailey, there is a very strong possibility that we will see a remake of Most Wanted. Thankfully, the 2005 version, not the 2012 one which sported the same name. Bailey played Officer Turf in the 2005 entry, and according to her, Need for Speed Most Wanted remake is being released in 2024. We can easily deduce that it's a new version of the 2005 Most Wanted, as Bailey says she'll once again be starring as the partner of protagonist Sergeant Jonathan Cross. If Bailey's talks of a remake prove to be accurate, it's unclear if she and Mackenzie, who of course voiced Sergeant Cross, have returned to the studio to record new lines, or if it will simply be reusing those from the original game. Worth noting though that this post was of course from July 2023. given we have just flipped across into 2025 and we have yet to still have any announcement about the remake, it would appear that this year is the year where we must now pin our hopes. But of course, with no official announcement, it is kind of anybody's guess at this point. But one would suggest that if it wasn't in the works, then why would Bailey have said such a thing? And the deletion of the post suggests that maybe she wasn't supposed to say anything about it. So it is with a huge sense of excitement, albeit slightly reined in, that I end this video in the hope that the announcement for the Most Wanted remake is not going to be too far away. So there we go, a great look at a fantastic franchise that perhaps has lost its way over the years, but still did, once upon a time, provide us with some fantastic games that have stood the test of time. Thank you so much everyone for watching. Let me know in the comments down below if you played either of these two entries. Did you have another favourite in the Need for Speed series, or did you miss them altogether? Let me know, and while you're at it, don't forget to like the video, hit that sub button, ring the notification bell for all alerts to my future uploads, and have a great day, and we'll see you all again very soon.